Hi! So today, as it's raining and I'm still struggling to get my apartment together and I just need to sit down, and we're going to talk about my current opinion, it could change, on plot lines and story beats. So if you've been on my channel for a bit, you know that I participated in the last NaNoWriMo in November, and what I did was I took an old project of mine that was my first novel. I completed. It was very, very, very bare bones, and it needed a complete overhaul and complete change. I even changed the genre and a lot of the main cast. And I really loved what came out of NaNoWriMo. It really captured me. I really enjoyed writing it. However, it was so wildly different from the original that all the notes I had written about the original's outline were trashed almost immediately. I went away from the original outline probably somewhere around, let's see if I can, I followed that. I would say I was in chapter 3 and I went in a totally different direction. Now, I have countless notes on what I was trying to do at the time, but the story really took on a life of its own. This happens a lot with my writing. It's very, very difficult for me to outline because I will create an outline based on what I think the characters are going to do, how I think they're going to react, but when I actually sit down to write it, the characters are just slightly different from how I originally anticipated. They end up growing into something I rarely see coming, and that means that the outline gets annihilated along the way. It doesn't work anymore. So I end up doing this thing where I just end up using dump sites. So I just dump random ideas for future scenes in there, but whether or not I use it, question point. So I almost immediately jumped the idea of an outline pretty early on because I just couldn't follow it. It didn't feel right for the story that was being created. And this happens to me a lot. At this point, I think I've gotten into the idea that while having some general kind of outline, and by general I mean really general, we're talking, you know, maybe just writing down some really, really, really major points. For example, writing down that the conflict that the character is going to have is going to be X, Y, or Z, and the character finds out that this part B is really important, and because of that they're able to do. So really major points I will write down, and that's usually fine. I will usually keep to those. Sometimes I'll tweak them a little bit, but those major things I can usually do just fine, but the specifics, actually having a detailed outline, can't seem to keep it. I can't for whatever reason. My stories end up being so wildly different than how I expect them to be from the jump. However, I did have a place where my characters were meandering and I wasn't able to get them out of it at first until I looked up something called a beat sheet. You guys have probably heard of these. There are quite a few different variations of them, but beat sheets are major points that a lot of stories tend to follow. Now these aren't exact, they're more like overarching ideas. So one of them would be like theme stated, promise of the promise, midpoint, bad guys close in, all is lost, dark night of the soul, which is where my characters are, because of course they are. So these are beats a lot of classic and very popular stories tend to fill. Now some stories slightly change the order of a few of these, some of them skip a few entirely. It's more if you want to see if your story's being too stagnant, if it's not moving properly. Sometimes these beat sheets can show you if your story's not moving enough. Because if you're in B story and you've been in the B story beat for 3-4 chapters, you need to get out. That's the B story. It's not the main story. It's not what we're actually talking about. For the main cast and characters, you need to move on. So it can be really useful, and I found that was really useful in just figuring out roughly how far I had to go when I was in NaNoWriMo, because at one point I thought at first that I was nearing the end, and then I very much wasn't, very suddenly, and I was very confused by that. I'm the author, but I had no idea what I was doing. But when I looked at a beat sheet, I was like, oh yeah, I hadn't gone as far as I thought I had. I'm only at the midway point. And that's why we had a reassurance of a new conflict. And it's really weird talking about this because it's something that I naturally end up doing in my writing most of the time. It's pretty rare for me to truly meander and lose my way. But if I think I'm further along than I am and I'm trying to force an ending before the ending is supposed to occur, my writing gets bad fast. Because I'm trying to force an ending because I feel like I should be there already, but I'm prematurely writing an ending when the ending should not occur. And sometimes the beat sheets can be useful for that, to let you know that, hey, slow down, you're only at this point, you've got time. But yeah, it's interesting because I'm just now looking at all of these pages I did during NaNoWriMo. And one of the things I had written down was celebrate your victories, not focusing on your failures. I circled victories. Interesting. I don't remember writing that. Oh my god, the last time I was looking at these pages and doing NaNoWriMo, I didn't have a job. I was in Japan looking for a job, and now I am working in Japan and living in my apartment. Okay, that's cool. That's cool. I think my big takeaway from my past NaNoWriMo experience and my current writing experience, as of right now, which it could change if I find some magical outlining method, but as of right now, I think my brain and the way I write currently, I just really need the freedom to allow my characters and story to progress in a way that makes sense to them as it happens, which I won't know until I'm in the scene and writing it and allowing it to sound as natural as possible. So I think for me, I don't have the ability to outline, at least not in the way people traditionally think of outlining. However, things like story beats are far more vague, and they really just are clue-ins to, hey, you might be slowing down way too much, you're stuck in one point of the story, you're taking a really, really long time with it, it probably doesn't need that much time, you can move on to the next thing. I feel like that, at least right now where I am, that seems to be more useful to me as an author. And I definitely don't adhere to it religiously. I really don't think you should. Honestly, a lot of the plot, a lot of the story beats I've seen so far, I've never really believed them to be insanely good. I think they're okay. They're a good reminder, but I wouldn't say that you could write a really great story using just the beats and following every single one religiously. I do think it's one of those things that's a decent tool to use, but you should definitely bend and break some of it based on the story you have. I feel like it's actually pretty rare that stories would follow something like that kind of beat sheet religiously. It seems like some of the pieces might be a little bit odd in a lot of the sheets I was reading. I think those sheets are created more just as reminders of, hey, like if you feel like your story is like stagnant as you're going, you're probably right, your gut's probably correct. Look at the beat sheet, see where you are roughly, or very roughly, and then that can clue you in of, oh, I've been stuck in this section way too long, let's just move on to something else. And that could give you a prompt to force your character forward. So it's a decent tool. I think I have some ideas about, I have similar feelings for quite a few writing tools, like things like plot embryos and the hero's journey. For example, they're good tools, but using them religiously, I feel, is actually a disservice to writing, and I feel like that can trap you quite a bit. I feel like they can be rather limiting if you trust them too much. They're tools and nothing more. At least that's my opinion right now. This being said, I haven't actually tried the plot embryo besides really, really basic experimentation. So I would have to try it more to have a true, firm opinion on it. But my gut instinct, based on my experience with outlining and things like the beat sheet, is if it's pretty general and you're just using it as a tool every once in a while, that's probably the better thing to do. That being said, I mean, if it works for you, if outlining is something you have a really good talent for and it really helps you stay on track and keep your characters all lined up, 100% totally go for it. But for someone like me that it's very unnatural to outline, outlining is very difficult for me to do, and I tend to stray from it quite a lot. I don't think outlining is what's cracked up to be for me, just simply because the way I write, I do need some amount of structure in that I do need to keep the story moving, keep it progressing, hit the kinds of plot beats I do want to hit. I do have inside my head things I want to address in the story usually. Exactly where they are can vary a little, but I do know generally what I want to do with the story. So I do still need to hit those things. But the exact timing of it, like what chapter I address my main character's fear of spiders. Like, it needs to be addressed in the story, but I don't want to write down I'm for sure doing that in chapter 7. Because as I'm writing, I could turn to find out that her fear of spiders is really just one of a far larger group of fears that are far deeper set, and that there's a reason for it, and that needs to be addressed, and that could end up taking far longer than I originally anticipated, or maybe shorter. Maybe, you know, the spider thing ends up as kind of a story B, and it's far smaller arc, and I just don't need that much time to spend on it. So I breeze through it in chapter 4, and then chapter 7 comes around, I'm like, I really don't need to address this, it's already been addressed. So because I allow my stories to grow as organically as possible, it does mean that outlining, at least the kinds of outlining I've been trying so far, the traditional forms of outlining, they haven't really been working, and I can't really foresee them working with how I operate. That being said, it doesn't mean I don't do any outlining, but I just outline as I go. I don't really outline first and then write. I'm more like, I'll write down what I want out of a scene when I create the scene. I'll create a new scene, and then I'll like jot down this little box what I'd like to do during that scene. However, sometimes I don't even follow that. Sometimes it turns to find out that the character needs to have a conversation. The conversation they have with another character takes longer than anticipated, and so I bunk that scene back. I wanted to do something else in the scene, but I just don't have time for it, and I need a scene change because now we've had a very, very long conversation between two characters. I need to move that scene. So this happens a lot to me. I don't outline well, and it doesn't. I think outline still has value, and structure, I still use structure. I just don't use it in the way most people see outlining. But yeah, those are my thoughts on that. Let me know if you guys use outlines or beat sheets, if you've ever tried that before, and what you thought about it. Are you all for it, or did it not work for you? I'm very curious, but I hope NaNoWriMo is going really well for you guys. I hope you're safe wherever you are. And yeah, I'm going to keep working on my apartment. I need to get some writing done. And food. I need to get food. I need to go grocery shopping. Oh no.